Yeah, I think we're live. Yep, we're live on YouTube.
Yep.
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 All right, everybody. Welcome. Let me get the chat room going. Give some people a second to join. I'm looking for it on YouTube.
And my error message says you're being streamed live, so must
All
be
right,
connected.
let me make sure. All right, everybody. Welcome. This is the Space Water Podcast, episode 19. It is July 6th, 2024. It's been a scorcher out there this summer, and once again, we're gonna have a scorcher of a show for you guys here on the Space Water Podcast with our longtime special guest and friend of the show, Mr. Gary Wayne, who's kind enough to share some time with us today. Fitting us in because he's got a really busy schedule, and it's always a pleasure to have Gary on the show. Everybody, if you're just finding out about Gary, you're going to be in for a treat. I know there's new people here every day, but he's been everywhere in circles that talk about alternative things related to spirituality, religion, and the conspiracies, even in our holy Bible. Everybody, Mr. Gary Wayne is a Christian contrarian. He's a best-selling author, and he's an all-around really great guy and a friend of the show. And we are a pleasure to have him here today. You could find him at Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and he has two books out in the Genesis 6 Conspiracy series. And Gary will be referencing those books today, and you'll be able to find more about Gary out today. Yeah, once again, that's Genesis6Conspiracy.com. You guys can support us right here in the super chat, and you can also support me at the Mystical Spiral store. Gary, I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. We're discussing the quest for immortality of the Solar Kings, which is the Nephilim bloodlines, the royal dynasties, the solar dynasties. And I think there's so many different avenues that we can go down that people are going to be really surprised how it goes. And I'm interested to go into this topic today with you, and it's really a pleasure to have you again.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and happy to be with you and your audience. And so, looking forward to maybe some of the feedback from the audience or any questions that they may have as we go through. And we love to take on both you and I their questions, so that they leave with maybe a little bit more knowledge and connecting a few more dots. So, yeah, so interesting sort of topic that you've listed. And my first thought was when I saw the title and the subject for the show is these are demigod kings. They're the offspring of the gods or fallen angels from the monotheist perspective. And they were originally created with an immortal body and an immortal spirit. And so at some point in time within their religion that is sponsored by the fallen angels and developed in book one, I make a good case that whether or not you want to use it more generically, but specifically from the Gnostics' perspective, as they look at the global history under their Polychronicon, is that Enoch, son of Cain, was the one who developed knowledge and put it into the seven sciences, and then decided that that knowledge was too precious, and that was kind of likely at the starting of the knowledge being provided by the gods or the fallen angels to create the civilizations, to create the technology. And so they created the mystical sun worship and bulk cult of the antediluvian period, which is the same religion that crosses the flood. But it's interesting that within that religion, you get almost a change in it that is with the introduction with the giants. And as I said, they're created as demigod kings, but immortal. But all of a sudden now they're trying to figure out how to recreate immortality after they die. So something changed. something had to change because they were originally immortal. They, demigod doesn't, it means they're a lesser god, but it means that they're born of the physical world and of the immortal spirit. So their body was immortal, and so was their spirit, but something changed. And we get that in Genesis 6:3, where it said all life is going to be limited to 120 years. And that's the physical body, not the immortal spirit that was passed on by the gods to the demigod kings, the Rephaim after the flood, the Nephilim before the flood, known by a plethora of names all around the world for these giants and demigods, but they all have the same history. They all have the same religion, and they all are seeking immortality to replace what was lost. And if people aren't familiar with the Bible in Genesis 6:3, that's the preamble to the flood story. And that's the creation of the giants from the sons of God, or angels, as they're understood in the Old Testament, as Job 2:1, Job 1:8, 34, 4 through 7, Psalms 82, Deuteronomy 32, and many other passages. But those are for people who are wanting to check the veracity of the sons of God. That's where you'll find the supporting sort of verses as to who they are. And that this is the preamble to the floods. All of the violence, all of the corruption, that's the context for the flood story. And the giants are going to be mostly wiped out, but they're going to show up somehow again after the flood. But it's that limiting of life to 120 years. And I think that's the post-diluvian introduction that probably happens after the flood versus before the flood, although they may have started to introduce some of these rituals before the flood to set up a system that they can find their way in the afterlife to be with their gods and to have immortality. And you have to have certain knowledge to do this. And so that is presupposing that their bodies are dying, which is exactly what Genesis 6:3. So this seems to be an add-on to the original religion and becomes the most dominant aspect, because that's the biggest thing that's driving the demigod kings and their solar worship is how do we get our immortality back? And it drives them in so much of what they do, that and their own rivals to be the dominant bloodline ruling the earth. So those are the two things, and the pantheon that they worship and they serve. Those seems to be the things that are driving the motivations. So as we start to talk about their obsession to regain immortality, that's kind of the context that we probably need to have on the table first, so that people understand why they're obsessed with that.
Yes, I agree. And people could see, because Gary can't do video currently where he has for the next month or two. So we got in the background Gary's website as well, which we'll be referencing throughout the show. And maybe I'll pull up some pictures of various things. But Gary, I agree with you 100%. That's the first thing we should put on the table. And I think also it goes down various aspects of certain bloodlines and people on Earth misunderstanding these ancient knowledge that was passed down or that was referenced in certain things, and then they took it their own routes. Or maybe it is sort of the ancient Asura Deva energies, where the Asura and current rises in some of these people, that the more greed and materialism and power current rises, and then sort of their rituals adjust towards it and change as accordingly. And then you have the other bloodlines, they're interpreting it a certain way, and it adjusts certain accordingly to them. You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I think you have that dualism that's within their religious solar cult and bull cult and many other things, that it's a multi-layered, allegorically encoded religious system with a lot of symbols and imageries. And so in Old Sanskrit, we're referring to devas and amritas being good. And so And we have a Western and an Eastern branch of this, as it was originally begat through the Indo-Aryan religion and Zoroastrianism, probably as we would have the first sort of name for that. And that these are what we understand today when they talk about white hats and black hats, that they have different motivations. They have the same pantheon of gods, they have the same agenda, they have a different way of getting there. So the black hats are typically understood for developing the black magic, and the white hats are typically understood for developing the white magic. And the black hats tend to not really care about humankind, and the white hats are said to care more about humans and feel there might be a small role for humans in the world that they would like to create. So however your belief system is, we need to sort of understand when Ra's talking about there's different aspects within their religion that's driving these bloodlines. They are loyal to specific celestial mafia godfathers, as I like to call them, or specific patriarchal gods or fallen angels, because it's an initiatory oath-based system, right? Just like the mafia setup. And they're called godfathers, and these are godfathers because they created offspring. So yeah, it's a kind of a double entendre I kind of like to throw out for a little bit of humor. But they swear an oath and receive their divine right to rule from a specific patriarchal god. So when they do their rite of inheritance in the royal ceremony, like King Charles III did, he is swearing an oath to a specific god, and maybe to more than one god if he has scion and noble bloodlines, but there'll be one dominant patriarchal gene and matriarchal gene that begat that bloodline. And so they like to call that the fairy gens or the gene of Isis, or the Elby gens is one as it comes through. That's involving a lot of the Western Europeans. You have the Creta gens, which is the Herculides bloodline from Zeus. As one of those bloodlines, he had several offspring. You have the Julia gens, which is Ares, and the Romulus and Remus as the basis for the Roman. But understand that all of these gods have second tier names, or a renaming or an evolving of names, because in Greece it would have been the Scythians and the dark haired Indo-Aryans that were there before the Greeks. And in Italy, it would have been the Etruscans there as the proto Indo-Aryan group that the migrating humans intermarried with when they got to Italy. So understand that there's been an evolution from the original Indo-Aryan Zoroastrian, and these are the ones that are the aboriginals in the land before the flood. I mean, after the flood. They're created after humans are created before the flood, depending on which source you're using from monotheist or polytheist, at what point giants are introduced, but it's after the humans are created. After the flood, they're the aboriginals. So the Noahites at the dispersion of Babel are going to migrate to all of these lands, and there are already giants there, and they're going to be merging those cultures. And that gets to be where you need to get an understanding of that, and then how you get different types of religions and different types of intermarriages and bloodlines. And it helps to understand as you're going through prehistory to have that sort of context as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's that's you're breaking it down good for Gary there, because people, and I'm glad you also gave people the point when I brought up the Asura and Deva and things, because people probably don't, some people listening probably don't even understand what those words mean or where they come from. Sometimes we throw them in there, with the
Yeah.
different,
Yep.
yeah, I'm glad you said that, and let's put on the table too, when we talk about the quest for immortality and what they're fighting over and the way it's interpreted in the ancient Vedic. Sometimes they even refer to it, Gary, as the cattle of Indra, or the light, which stands for the light of the sun, the light of stars, the knowledge that they're harnessing
Yep.
from the stars, the wisdom that's coming down in the light. And so, like, when they're talking about certain stealing the light of stealing the cattle of Indra. They're talking about stealing the light from the stars, taking
Yeah.
the knowledge from the stars as well. And it's misinterpreted even in bloodlines going down even to this day, Gary. Something very interesting I wanted to bring up to you. You find this, it's funny and frightening too, because I had a dream related to it. There's certain African tribes. I don't know if I could pull up the picture because it might be too graphic, but it's not sexual in nature. It's cultural in nature. But there's African tribes, Gary, that they have the what's the name of the tribe? Hold on. It's called the Bubal tribe. Bubal, and this is in Africa, and they literally make the men as they're growing up until they get married ingest the monthly blood flow of the woman cattle, right? And they have certain cattle, and this makes their testicles, their scrotum, get huge, like bean bags, literally like bean bags they're sitting on. And it was so funny when I
Yeah.
was reading
The
this.
star, a form
This
of a form of the starfire.
form of the starfire. It's also interpreted also as, if they're getting ancient knowledge that they don't truly understand, and they're talking about the the, taking the blood of the cattle or the light from the cattle, right, they're misinterpreting the
Yep.
cattle of the gods,
Yes.
cattle of the sun, and
Yes.
they're literally ingesting it just like the
Yep.
starfire. It's a more asura and physical and greedy and power way of interpreting it, right? And then Gary,
Yeah.
I had
So
this dream, right? Check this out before I give it back to you. I had this dream. I don't know if it was the day after I saw the pictures of the Bubal tribe, but that very night or the night after, I had a dream, and
I
all
can
of a
see
sudden,
I can see why that might cause a dream.
yeah, and check this out. And as I all of a sudden I'm walking up to one of those big burial mounds, those burial mounds of the ancients. We have them all over the United States.
Yeah.
Those huge mounds, right?
Yep.
And on top of the mound is sitting this big giant guy. He's got his arms folded. And I walk up to the foothills of the mound and he gets up. And then the burial mound is actually his big testicles. And I'm like, oh my God, there's going to be an avalanche because there was like stuff falling from him. It was all the trees and everything were actually stuff on his big mound of testicles. And I knew he was about to put the testicles back down on the ground and it was going to be like an avalanche. So I started running and it woke me up in a fright.
Yep.
It like
Yeah.
woke me up.
Yes.
Like it woke me up out of the dream.
Yeah. So a lot of things packed in there, and I'll sort of add a little bit in for context as well. So when we're talking about the sun cult and the bull cult, that sort of intertwines into some of the imagery, particularly with the cows and the menstruum from the cows as well, from the matriarchal or the goddess side versus the bull from the patriarchal side. But there's both. It's a dualistic religion with goddesses and gods and queens and kings, and because they're divine representatives on the earth. And so when you see that sun disk with two horns, just as Carnaum in Mount Hermon is known as the two horns, you have the sun and the bull cult intermeshed into that sun and the two horns of the bulls. And the gods in most of the religions and goddesses were known as bulls. So in the Ugaritic texts are clearly called that. In the Sumerian tradition, they're clearly called that, and it's in the you have the same understanding in the Egyptian with the calf and the Osiris cult and all the things associated with bulls there. You have gods associated like Moloch, as in bull-like, of the Baalim. It's a commonality, and not only were the gods called bulls, but so were their demigod offspring. So when you see the definition of Nephilim and it says bully, that just doesn't mean they're as a bully as we understand it. Put that on steroids, so to speak, in angelic DNA, and it means that they were literally tyrants, which are also part of the definition, and bullies as part of their description because they're the offspring of the heavenly bulls. And then when you look at that starfire, that's to try and recreate through the menstruum additional cognitive abilities and longer life. And the other aspect of it is that the bulls are understood for their large private parts, just as fallen angels were known for their massive private parts as well. That was part of the seduction in many of the apocryphal accounts of when the fallen angels enticed the women, both before and after the flood. And so you can imagine that they're also trying to emulate their gods in that sort of reproductive ideology, and in either saying that they are part of a bloodline or that they're looking for the gods to reproduce more of those bloodlines. But it's just so layered in how they do the worship in polytheism. But it's developed over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, although most of the traditions can be dated right back to early after the flood. And then those same traditions, for the most part, there's some changes that were there before the flood because it's the same religion. Yeah, that's crazy, those pictures.
Yeah, you see that?
Yeah,
They're like bean bags. And
yeah,
it's a problem with the tribe too. You know, and it's all due to ingesting cattle flow.
yeah.
You know, that's
It's a crazy reaction, but it's again, they're probably trying to emulate. And also, in India, that's why the cow is so sacred, and that's the matriarchal aspect versus the male, um, in Hinduism. So all of it has that same commonality within the religions around the world, and it's telling us there's a source religion and a source pantheon. That's at the heart of all the polytheist religions around the world. And they're called by different names. They may have slightly different rituals, but they're all designed to do the same kinds of things.
yeah, it's incredible. There's a few different ones I found too. That it's the Bubal tribe does it, and also there was a Maasai people or something right here. Look at the Maasai people. Consumption of a unique source of combination of cow blood and milk.
Yeah,
It's incredible.
yep,
Yeah, see, and they're doing it. It's a form of masculinity and power, and
yep.
you know, and
It's unfortunate we don't have a written record of the history of Africa,
yeah,
um, as we do in other places around the world, because I just think just by geography, there has to be so many connections. But we're only left with sort of oral traditions, and not that many. I've had some sent to me, and I'd love to be able to use it in my books and research. But if I don't have something other than an oral tradition, or at least a book where it's written down, where the oral tradition is recorded, then it's very hard to use it for a basis of research.
yeah.
Um,
There's a few in the Golden Bow with Sir James Fraser.
right? Yeah.
There's a few in there, the oral traditions, and there's a few in Theosophy as well, but there's not many. You're right, not with Africa.
There's not with Africa. And even with the First Nations in North America, they're oral traditions and they're not written down. But when I look at a lot of the traditions of the bloodlines within the chiefs and the four-class system within the First Nations, it's the same class system, it's the same bloodlines. You have the shamans, you have a bloodline of priests as well, and that the account of whether it's Bigfoot, whether or not it is the little people as in elementals, whether or not it's with the giants, the commonalities and the source of their civilizations, the commonalities within those traditions support each other, that there's again that original source, and that they're all telling different aspects of the same sort of history, and there's very, very similar to Central and South American. So again, that's again sort of leads back to a common source, whether it's the seven sages, and the White Snake Clan after the flood, or whatever version that generates that whole civilization or civilizations. Um, there's there's a source there that's telling a common history, and again, common religious practices within the bloodlines and the priest class that's looking for that immortality to be with their gods.
And I think this is ultimately even the struggles of everyday man, and even maybe the story of Adam, right? He's wanting to take that knowledge
Yeah.
and sort of
And
extend get the light, and even
yeah,
right, and that seems like that's what caused the whole problem we're in today. We're sort
yeah,
of like
yeah,
microcosms of Adam.
yeah. And the demigods and the followers, the humans, they're all wanting to be created immortal and become like the stars. So, like Osiris goes up to
Yes.
Orion. And stars biblically is an allegory for a fallen angel and a loyal angel. And they all have a representative star within the sky. So it seems like there's this wanting to be
Yeah. Their own
angelic or
personalities and traits.
godlike, yeah,
Yeah.
and have their own star because they're now um, immortal or have been returned to that immortal basis. But even when they were immortal on Earth, they couldn't transition to be an immortal spirit and have their own star in the sky and be in the location where their gods are without these sort of special sort of rituals. So even when their original creation, they didn't have the same abilities as the gods they're trying to emulate. And one of the interesting things that has a description about the relationship between the jinn, which there's different levels of jinn in the Quran, which are basically fallen angels. Although one could argue a lower class might be the demigods. Iblis is a jinn, but so are some of the lower ones. So there's a distinction in there. But the jinn, like Iblis, fallen angels or gods, Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, they're created in the Quran, what they say, from the smokeless fire. Something so hot, so powerful, it has no smoke, but it has the ability to create immortal spirit. And it's a very interesting thought. And I don't you don't get a lot of well, you don't get really any references elsewhere that's sort of details what the Quran might be talking about. The closest thing that you get to it might be the lake of fire, where that's designed not to necessarily destroy the spirit, although God could probably create it hot enough to create if those spirits were created from the smokeless fire. But it's the punishment, and it's an everlasting punishment. But is that a form of death for immortals? That's a whole different level of things that we don't get a lot of detail on. But it's just interesting. These beings that the demigods are trying to emulate and become, they want to be like the creation from the smokeless fire, as the Quran talks about.
Yeah, and interpreting it, they might even be talking about like you're sent inside the sun, some sort of like fire in the sun, you know, that
Yeah,
and
we don't
yeah,
know. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, it might even be
but yet,
related to that.
but as you've mentioned, is so much of their ritual has the astronomical aspect to it, and then some sort of encoded or embedded knowledge of what that source and power and energy can do, and that it's able to be tapped into somehow, some way. And that's again goes to the level of allegories and imagery of you have to be an adept to understand all the various layers of their worship. So
Yeah, I mean,
as people on the outside looking in.
yeah, yeah, even in the rings with the you were mentioning like the fairy, with they always have like the golden ring where people have to dance around it, and fairies and satyrs
Yeah,
dance around it, and they hook
yeah,
arms and twist around and dance, and magnetic field lines twist to form the golden rings that we see right here behind me, right? So like, and it's a solar ritual. So, and they're showing twisting snakes, twisting people, dancing around rings. It's all maybe coming from advanced knowledge that was about the sun and the stars and the universe
Yes.
that was
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
misinterpreted later on,
Yeah. And
and
whether or not they were told everything that it meant, they were taught to do these rituals based
yes,
on either what they saw or what they were taught to emulate aspects of their
yes,
solar worship, which was the the sun goddess and the sun god of the pantheon. So they're doing things to emulate their position in the sky. And in the seven wandering stars, as they're understood in the Bible, those are the seven major gods that are represented in the pantheon, which is again a standard kind of all around the world. And it's understood as the same 7 days of the week, as they used three different pantheons, Greek, Roman, and Norse, to create the days of the week, but same gods, just different sort of names. And so you get sort of the best in terms of the Roman uh, version, where you get Saturn, Jupiter, Sol, or the Sun. Um, you got Mercury, you got Venus, you've got Mars, and I think I've missed one in there, but there's seven of them. Probably the moon is the one I missed. And those are the ones that are representative, and all of their rituals will do things to emulate that god that they're doing the ritual to, that would be recognized as that planet or that moon or that sun. And with the lower pantheon, we don't know what they would be doing with, but they would be honoring them, whatever the traits are as stars, uh, as they're allegorically called in the universe. So it's not random, these rituals, and they come down through the ages, and they've been preserved. So there's more to it, and you're right. Scientists misinterpret it, or properly misinterpret it,
it's the
as an
origins of
intended
mythology.
misinterpretation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's
yeah,
that's how
because
we
they're
that's how mythology was generated, right? There's
yep,
advanced
yep,
knowledge that was misunderstood and given very earthly attributes and names and
yep,
situations.
yep, and that was their way to preserve that knowledge.
Yeah,
And eventually, when some of that knowledge comes out, it'll be able to be decoded. And of course, the scientific community are going to look like you know morons. But then they're
yeah,
probably going to say, well, we already knew. We already knew, but we just didn't want to tell everybody because they weren't ready for it. It's probably what they'll say.
yeah. Let's talk about also how they have various trees in here. We have not just oak trees and apple trees and fig trees and walnut trees and different types of trees, but also trees of knowledge that are related to gaining
Yep.
immortality. The Chinese tree of knowledge had this immortal peach tree, and
Yeah.
like every 3,000 years or something, it would bear a certain fruit. And it would be it's very interesting because that's very similar to other myths that we hear and stories that we hear. And it says that like every 3,000 years that there's an elapse before the tree blossoms and another 3,000 years before it sets the fruit. And then all this mystical significance to all that and then they had this great mother in China who was the royal king mother, and she produced this immortal peach, Gary. So are they talking about some royal bloodline where she's producing some sort of flow that's ingested, or what are
Yeah,
we
that's
talking about? Are we talking about a star
that's
that every 3,000 years emits some sort of light that's ingested?
yeah, typically there's a couple concepts I think that you're putting in there. So I think we need to sort of understand that there is a tree of knowledge, whether or not it's described as the tree of gnosis, um, or it's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Um, and understand that knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's the application of that knowledge that determines whether it's good or evil, and whether or not you have the ability and the wisdom to do that knowledge just for good, which is the sort of the key test. And you have technological trees of, some people say, of life, but could be source of knowledge and life and energy that the Anunnaki did rituals around. And the Anunnaki is in the gods, not in their spurious offspring, because they're depicted with angelic wings and an eagle's face and a human face. So very much cherubim-like as doing those kinds of rituals. So you have also this understanding of this tree of knowledge in Gnosticism as being the apple tree, as you mentioned. And that when they use that for a lot of subdivided allegory, so that when you cut the apple in a certain way, it plots the track of Venus through the zodiac and is related to Satan. And that's the knowledge that Satan wants us to have, because he wants to free us, according to the Gnostic belief, from the evil god of the universe who enslaves us in lack of knowledge. So he wants unlimited knowledge that's
Yeah.
presented.
And
And so that's
interesting,
what the fallen angels were.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's what the fallen angels were providing before the flood, was this unlimited knowledge that I think took the earth to a level that had the ability to destroy itself by fire, which is why the flood was brought about. So as an intercession to have a bit of a restart, so that all the names in the book of life would have an opportunity to leave their name in the book of life or have it blotted out. And that destruction by fire is reserved for the end time biblically, or the age of Aquarius in the polytheist sort of version, where you have this destruction by fire and then a recreation out of that, which is the Shiva doctrine, as a creator god that creates a new world out of the ashes. So you have that knowledge that is coming back, and I think we're starting to see some of that knowledge. And so is there a connection to the mother goddess coming back? Yes, I do. I think we're going to see that mother goddess come back as these end times, if we're indeed in the fig tree generation, like I think we are. We're going to see that play out, because that was the most important aspect of the dualistic religion. And that in the secret societies, they hold like Sophia up, the supplier of all wisdom and knowledge, at the highest level. And with some nebulous force, probably Satan, as an allegory for that nebulous force, created the 12 archons.
Yeah.
And so this is the equivalent to the divine essence and the mother goddess aspect of the Atma particle and the Brahman that supplies all of that infinite knowledge. And in there's a connection to the pineal gland and the third eye that's going to be receivers for that. And somehow maybe the mark of the beast will also be part of that transmission. Maybe for the people who aren't of the bloodlines, let's say humans, that would get that same technological aspect to that knowledge. So again, what we're seeing, and again, most of the records, unfortunately, were destroyed by the communists. Probably not all, but most of the ones that we could trace a lot of the mystical history of China has been destroyed. So it's hard to get a lot of references on that, but it's not surprising they would have a common story that would be what was before and what will be again. And then you underline that 3,000-year cycle. Whatever the cycle is, nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. So all that knowledge that was present before the flood, maybe even shortly again after the flood, is going to come back. And we see that knowledge being developed today. So we're going to see that final extension of that development of that tree of knowledge and that tree of life that was also in the Garden of Eden. And I don't think they're the same tree. But I think there's something that's coming back. And then there's another passage in Ezekiel 31, and I talk about that in book 2, in section 6. and it's called the trees of Eden. And you have the cedar tree, of course, um, and you have the fir tree and or a cypress tree that's talked about in there. But also you have, in association with Mount Hermon, the oak tree and the elm tree and the ash tree in the Bible. And those are all aspects of, like, the Scythians and the Tuatha De Danann, was the oak tree was the most significant tree. And it represented sort of the strength. And it's also compared to, as a description for the Amorites, who were, as tall as the cedars of Lebanon and as strong as the oak trees. And the oak tree is used for the genealogical tree, or the elm tree, which is probably the more accurate version for the translation, would be the elm tree that we see in the family tree today in the allegory. And the cedar is the organizational structure of the world and the secret societies, at least in the West. And both of those roots go back to their celestial mafia godfathers in their heaven, which is in Hades or Sheol or Argatha, or all of the different names for that. So you have this Assyrian tree that's in the Garden of Eden, and an Asher in Assyria, that's a post-Diluvian patriarch and nation. Assyria is an allegory for Satan in that tree. And just as he's described as a cherubim with his canopy, that's what's being described, and the whole world is under his canopy and his shadow. And there's a couple other trees that are mentioned in there. These are angelic trees that were in the garden, just as Satan was in the Garden of Eden in Ezekiel 28, and in uh, uh, as it's recorded in the Bible. And so I kind of walked through some of that allegory, but my larger point is these trees have a significant ancient meaning and a connection back to the gods in many, many sort of aspects. And you also look at that oak tree and the elm tree or the ash tree, and you look at the world tree that joins heaven and earth. That's the same kind of tree, just with a different allegory. And one expects you might see that sort of formation in the universe as well, but I've not done any research to look for that, because it's a constant.
Yeah, Gary, and well, you mentioned there's a few things that came to me when you were talking. I have to mute myself because I don't want to interrupt. I'll jump in. It's like I get on the edge of my seat when certain things that you say, because it just sparks things. And it's a really, really amazing. Thanks you for breaking a lot of that down. And you mentioned also the apple tree. That's sacred, but put to with it goes by with the mistletoe, and they called it the tree of pure gold, right? So this is also some sort of allegory from information for the sun. And a lot of the tree references, like in Vedic, they have the banyan tree that with Krishna, and in other ones they have the acacia tree and different trees, and some, like with Gilgamesh, they have the hulupu tree, right? And this is all about stopping the waters, separation of the waters and things like that. And we have the magnetosphere that is like a sideways weeping willow tree. You see the big bulbous end here and the swaying branches of the magnetic field lines, and that is a swirling vortex magnetic field of information coming from the sun in here, all particles from the sun. And CERN built a magnetic field that's 1,000 times stronger probably than Earth's magnetic field, with their hadron collider, with all the particles smashing against each other. So it is like a tree of knowledge, and it's ingesting the light of the sun, this magnetic field, right? It's stealing the light of the sun. It's stealing the cattle of Indra. And the magnetotail over here stretches out on the night side, and it actually is stealing the cattle of Indra. It's Vitra, and it has to be released. It's the Tiamat and the magnetotail, and it's talked about in a lot of the ancient cultures. And the apple tree is made, and is the tree of pure gold, and they made covenants beneath this tree as well. And even the swastika cross, and that cross it could be looked at as a swirling uh sign of a tree and the sun as well all together. And even the Hindus, they had this with the Naga, they had this tree of frankincense where it would have a certain fragrance, and it was guarded by these winged Naga, or these winged serpents. And this could be an
Yep.
allegory also for solar references. And the seraphim are very
Yep.
similar to this, Gary. You talk about them,
Yep.
all the time.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so, as above, so below, right? So that's kind of why you're looking for those
Yes.
things, not only in the heavens, but what's done in below the earth as well, from two different types of double entendre allegories, or however you want to sort of express it. Did you say Tiamat in that mix?
Yeah, because you have Vitra and Indra, right? And then you also
Yeah.
got Marduk and
Yeah.
Tiamat, very similar,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
So what's interesting about that, because you're kind of saying that was the tail of Tiamat?
Yeah, because they stretch out at night, right? And the
Yeah.
magnetic tail stretches out on the night side, and they're stealing. Vitra is literally stealing the cattle of
Yeah.
Indra, which is
Yeah.
stealing the rays of
Yeah.
the sun. And they
Yeah.
always keep
So,
laying down at night, and then
yeah.
as morning rises, the
Yeah.
sun comes. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is Tiamat is a serpentine, seraphim, Naga type of parent god, consort of Apsu in the Sumerian pantheon, and that Tiamat is killed. And whether or not it's the name of Tiamat is Verta or Lotan or Yam on 1,000 different names around the earth. There's this
Ahi.
same
There's one
story
that's
about
one that's
this.
like
Yeah,
AHI too. Ahi or something, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Where this female goddess, and Tiamat was a mother goddess of the dragon Magianic bloodline as part of the source to the fairy bloodline and the matriarchal dragon bloodline. Absu would be the patriarchal source there, unless she had another consort that started it. We won't go into all of those variations, but um, and in the Bible you have God killing Leviathan, and Leviathan is very much a kind of a description of Satan as well. And again, if you look at this female version being killed in prehistory, and then in the book of Isaiah, the male's going to be killed in the end time. And so Satan isn't thought of as having a consort. But if you now look at the female Leviathan as being the same story through a polytheist lens as Lotan, Yam, Ahi, Verta, Tiamat all around the world, then that's the consort of Satan that would be perhaps coming back at the top of that pantheon somehow, some way, in the end time. And it may be that Tiamat is actually in the pit prison and not been killed, but it's an allegorical, like God's being killed in polytheism. They just kind of disappear, right? And so we could have that dualistic aspect with Satan and the female Leviathan, or serpentine type of parent goddess at the top of the council of the gods in the end time, and being worshipped with Antichrist as the sun. So you get that allegorically in how the Gnostics worked through secret societies and their belief systems and allegories with a post-Diluvian set. I could use other ones, but the most common one that they use is Osiris as an allegory for Satan, Isis as the queen of heaven for the original queen of heaven, and Horus the sun, which is the Antichrist in that sort of allegory, which is why, again, through their polytheism, they overlaid the Egyptian imagery of Mary and the baby Jesus, which is the same image as Isis and Horus.
That's so awesome. That's so cool. And you guys are just joining us here on YouTube. We're speaking with the one and only Gary Wayne. You could find his website at genesis6conspiracy.com. We have it up on the screen. You guys can ask questions in the chat room. Thank you for everybody for joining us. Yeah, Gary, it's awesome. Even with that legend of the immortal peach tree with China, I thought you would find this interesting. One of their legends that goes along with this is of Wu Ti. WOO-TE, Wu-Ti or Te, Wu-Te. He had eaten this immortal fruit, and it gives references that it comes from the cosmos. It has to do with the stars, right? So, and after he ate this fruit, he built this terraced pyramid of mud, where it was high enough to reach heaven and to the mother of the immortal peach. And then she descends to earth. Maybe it's the light coming to earth by means of this pyramid coming down the pyramid, the light coming down the pyramid for 7 days and 7 nights, and that she might discuss with Wu Ti during this time the principles of reason and hidden knowledge. And then this pyramid, which it has 7 steps or stages or seers or rishis, right? It has this great mother goddess of the 7 stars, like the Kabiri we mentioned in other ones, and it's belonging to the Mount, who was the royal mother Si Wang Mu, who living high up in the mountain of Quan Lun, and her tree produced this immortal peach. So maybe it's the light that's living high up in the mountain that comes down on the mountain they're talking about. And it produced this immortal peach for what it was believed to be the elixir of life, of immortality, that it could be distilled and making the peach a symbol of longevity or immortality. And the word God in Chinese, just like in Egyptian, in cuneiform and hieroglyphic writing, represents a star all the time. So,
It's just a constant. It's just a
yeah.
constant. The star people, that's when you hear about that in First Nations. And so that's how it's story. I mean, I don't know the age of that story. I haven't heard that one before. I'm gonna have to do some research on that. But what I heard was it sounded more like a post-Diluvian story and very much akin to Enmerkar at Eridu and or Nimrod at Babel, and that there was technology sort of associated with those mountains through the Sumerian version. And for some reason, biblically, God steps in and stops it. But you also have the same version with the Chula and the Aztec in Central America as well. And that this pyramid was being built with the help of giants. And then in the Aramaean version, not Aramaean, Armenian version, you have a similar sort of accounting. But it's that Cadian understanding of Babel, which would be, would have been more Babalu, but that means a gateway of the gods or a stargate. So a technology to go interdimensionally where the divine essence would be, which is in the Hindu religion that ancient Taoism was based on. It was an extension of the Hindu religion as it migrated east with the Sanim. And so it's saying that not only could you go interdimensionally, but you could get this access to the Atman and the divine essence, because that's the source of all knowledge that is sent instantaneously through all dimensions through quantum entanglement. It's an invisible particle that merges with a particle you can measure that has all the knowledge of the universe that would be you would have access to, and you could sort of feed off of, as if you were eating a fruit to learn more. The more you access, the more you could channel into that. And so, yeah, I look at that peach allegory as being very similar to that unlimited knowledge, in akin, but maybe a little bit different, to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because it's not just specifically all knowledge. It's how to take knowledge and apply it in the wrong way in the biblical sort of version. But there's this access to knowledge that is going to be required in the end times, because the two things that's required for godhood or immortality that the bloodlines are chasing, and the giants have chased ever since Genesis 6:3, is you need to have not only immortality, and in this case, in the physical world, with a physical body. So you're going to have replacement sleeves for your consciousness or your spirit, as we would understand that from a Christian perspective, but access to unlimited knowledge as well, which comes through access to the divine essence, and the third eye and the pineal gland and all the different sort of allegories that it is encoded in, so that you could be like a god.
Yeah, that's so true. It's to be like the gods, for to rule as the gods, to represent, and rule over others. And it's a distortion. I think that's why at one time I think, Gary, the knowledge was more in tune with the flow and harmony of the universe. And maybe when like what they talk about, when Adam sampled the tree, it brought death. It brought destruction, and things like that. It brought a fraction, fractured, right? The maybe the progression of the human spirit fractured.
Well, that's the ideology in polytheism, and you see that expressed in Star Wars with the good force and the evil force. And the good force is in harmony with the universe, and the evil force is at odds with that and trying to create that chaos to create tyranny. And those are the two dual aspects of polytheist religion that fight perpetually.
Well,
Now
it's
you look
basic,
at
but doesn't monotheism basically, it's the same thing though? It's like they believe Adam sampled the from the tree, and humans fell from that, right? We fall from that. So that on that they both believe the
it,
same, right?
it yeah, yeah, there's certainly a start to that in terms
Yeah.
of how the knowledge is used, right? So the big difference between monotheism and polytheism is the outcome. And in the outcome in polytheism, whether it's at the macro level, at the God level, or at the visible ones in the physical universe, is there's this good and evil, good magic, black magic, white hats, dark hats that fight perpetually, and the same in the celestial realm, that goes on forever. It never ends. It just cycles.
Hmm.
From a monotheist perspective, and again, it all depends on how you want to understand it, what your belief system will be, is that there's an end to that war of good and evil. So one is without end, and one has a specific end and a limited time. And from a monotheist belief, that time would be getting closer and closer to the end of that allotted time. So where it would come to an end.
Damn, I gotta
As
go
you,
with the
so that's,
monotheistic side again on that one.
yeah, which would be nice because,
I
but
I definitely
here's how it
believe
comes
that.
together in the end time. We have, that's the end of the age, but then there's a millennium, and then there's a new heaven, a new earth. In the polytheist side that I mentioned with the age of Aquarius, you have this destruction of the world with fire, and then a restart. So it continues again. Nothing changes in the hierarchy. In the monotheist side, there's a change in the hierarchy, and all the opposing forces are eliminated. One deduces that there won't be rebellious immortal spirits after that, but we only deduce that. We're not told that. But one from everything that is sort of written, that would be the sort of extension, that there wouldn't be another rebellion down the road. But who knows what happens in eternity? Certainly not humans.
Yeah, and like someone said earlier in the chat room, maybe humans aren't really meant to know, you know, and
Not until we're raised up to be like angels. And
yeah,
then we'll know a lot more, but we'll never know everything God knows, just as even Jesus doesn't know the time of his coming. He knows the hour, but not the exact time. And just as the fallen angels didn't know about the resurrection, as First Corinthians talks about, otherwise they would not have had him crucified. So angelic beings have massive knowledge, and we're going to be like that, but we'll never have all of the knowledge that God has. And who knows, maybe that was part of what uh, provoked the original sort of jealousy and wanting to be even more powerful and to be like God.
yeah. I mean, is it called the Shenu in Hebrew? I think it was called the
Or
Shenu
what?
tree. Yeah, the Shenu Hebrew tree. They have this,
Yep.
yeah, the Shenu, like they call it, or something like that. Or the thorn bush. Sometimes it's even called, I think.
The Shatia as well.
Yeah, that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's the mystical Jewish tree that you're talking about. Yeah, they got
yeah.
many different formats to some sort of technology that's kind of tree-like in its format,
Yeah.
And then the allegory would be the tree. And it would be kind of similar what you see in that format. That's technology is kind of more akin to what's being shown in what the Anunnaki are doing a ritual around in the Sumerian reliefs.
Yeah. Sometimes they call it the Assyrian moon tree, I think. Like this, right?
There you go. That's
Yeah.
it. That one in the middle at the top. That's the best sort of colored description of it.
Which
So
one,
you look
right?
at that shape. Yeah, that's a close up of it. But there was a see. So that has more of an akin to look at the Jewish mystical technology side versus a tree, which they also showed in your pictures before.
Like this one?
It's the one on my screen to the right. It's got that dark purplish black screen. That's yeah. So they're doing a ritual around it. And in this one, you've got the cherubim human face on them versus the eagle face, which is in another one below on your screen. And they're doing some sort of ritual. So
Trying to get a good one. Oh, those aren't them. I don't see the one with the cherubim.
um, it was on your Google screen. If you scroll down, go back to where you had
Yeah.
the Google part
This right here?
before you
Yep.
clicked into this. Yeah, no, not that one. So go back to where you have all the different options and menus to go into for pictures, not into the one specific like you're in. Go back out to the Google search.
Did I go out too far?
Okay. No, you still got to get back to the search.
Your Assyrian moon tree again. This is what I typed in.
If you hit, okay, but okay. Well, anyways, when I saw it, I can't move your screen. So
Was it
scroll
here?
down. Yeah, scroll down. Scroll down on that page. Keep scrolling down. Oh, there it is. It says under ancient Mesopotamian beliefs, Tree of Life, Syria Press. You've got a tree, and then you've got the Anunnaki bird face at the top. So it's a no, you went into the old screen again.
Oh,
You got to
this is
go
not the one that you're talking about?
where?
I have it up on share screen right now.
I don't see. I see massive amount of pictures.
Oh, you don't see one big picture up there?
No,
This one right here. You're not seeing
no,
the same
I'm
thing I
not
am?
getting a picture. No, does it have an eagle face on it? There it is. That's the one. It's up now.
Yeah.
See that eagle face? Yeah, same tree,
Oh, you
same
got
type
a
of beings.
delay.
Only
There
one
must
has
be
a
a delay.
yeah. It could be there's
Yeah,
an
there's a
eagle
delay.
face instead of a human face, but everything else is identical. So when the cherubim take a physical form in the physical world, they don't go with four faces. They choose one of them. It could be a lion face, it could be a bull face, it could be a bird face, or it could be a human face. But it's the same angelic being, but the same whatever that is, some sort of tree. Some people say the tree of life, or is it more of a technology?
Yeah, well, I have an interesting thing that talks about all this as well, but people could take it or leave it. I think the eagle and the gold are all allegories of the sun, and they have twisting vines that form loops always. And I think that is the magnetic field lines forming the coronal loops. And that's where all the light is coming from the sun. That's also a weapon of the sun. It's
Yeah,
the golden noose
yeah,
of the sun,
yeah.
right? And
If
they
it was
talk about it
just
in even
if
Native
it
American
yep.
myths.
Yeah, and I think like the eagle can fly into the sun and all sorts of things like that.
And
But if it was
the
just
wings represent the solar wind to me.
but
When you know how
yeah,
they have
but
the winged
but
disc.
but but if it was just isolated to the eagle face as that single understanding, then you wouldn't have the same imagery with a human face. It's
Well,
more let me finish.
uh,
It's more isolated to the angelic being watch as a watcher that does all the same things that you're saying, but it's the angelic being, not specifically the eagle one.
yeah, it's the
That's just one of
intelligence
the
of yeah. Yeah, I'm saying the
right.
same thing you are, Gary. It's because like
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
the being is the intelligence of the sun, the light of the sun. That's because like the watchers are the sun, they're the stars, and it's the intelligence that's coming from the stars, whether they come in the form of
Yeah.
nature of
I would turn that in, I would turn that inside out. The sun and the star is an allegory for the being, not vice versa.
I hear what you're saying, but the sun
Yep.
is
So
the created by the universe, right? The God is all of the universe, and then each specific sun or star to me is an angel, and the intelligence of that sun is
yes.
unimaginable. So there's certain
Yeah.
intelligences that come with that sun and star, and some of them come in the form of beings. That's how I
Yep.
look at it.
But again, yeah, that's how you look at it, and I would just flip it around a bit. We're getting to the same end, but I side on it as the supplier of knowledge, which is the being versus the star that it's the allegory.
See, to me, there is no being. It's because they're unseen. It's the light of the sun that
Yeah,
touches our third eye and the
yeah,
antenna of that we are
yeah.
that creates these
Well,
telepathic beings.
but light, but light in polytheism is an allegory for knowledge.
Yeah. Well, that it's to me, it's
Yeah,
the same. It's the same thing. Light, knowledge. It's all coming. We're receiving that light. It's coming to us as
yeah.
information.
So there's a Hebrew word that's called the host of heaven that you're not supposed to worship in the Bible, which
Yeah.
is planets and stars and right. That's the
Yeah.
Hebrew word Saba, and it means an angelic army. So that's why I do the inverse of the understanding is if all my sources take it back to being a being, and then all the other things are allegories and things to help describe and in honor of the angels. So I think there's a star that's created. It might be the original thing that creates the being, and that's the original immortal star that's out there for them where they're created in that smokeless fire. I'm speculating now, but I put more emphasis on the being that comes out of that than the permanent memorial to it.
Yeah. But just because I'm interpreting it as the light from the sun and not the being, it doesn't mean that I'm worshiping it either. You know?
No, no, and it doesn't change the other things that you're saying about it. It's
Yeah.
just I have a different biases to it.
No, I get it. I get it. It's just
Yep.
the ancient people also believed that mounting the tree, was a means of reaching this paradise or their place of rest. And that's an interesting way of interpreting it. I don't know what the actual way, but that was the way of that they thought that when you mount this tree, finally you're reaching paradise.
Yeah.
And maybe this was the Tower of
Yeah.
Babel.
Yeah. Well, or the New Eden
Yeah.
that they're going to try and introduce. Because if that's either the tree of knowledge or the tree of life, or both, or both of those were in Eden as well, right? So, and even in the Sumerian tradition, they have the same story of these trees in this special garden.
Yeah, I mean, they have you've talked about it before on shows, the maypole, and even the
Yeah.
maypole, you have this twisting vine that goes around the maypole, and at the top you have a ring that's around the
Yeah.
maypole, and it's called the tree of sun or the tree of fire,
Yeah.
right? It seems to me it's
Yep.
very in advanced information about the sun that was given to us in very earthly attributes and symbolic
Oh, well,
ways.
we agree. Yeah. No, no, we agree about that. It's just one nuance that we're look at it from the flip side of each other.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing with you on anything, and I think it's good
Yep.
to have
Yep.
these things that
Yep.
go on. Because if I just have
Yeah.
somebody on where I'm kissing their ass on everything they say, I mean, what the hell good is it?
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is
I,
great,
I,
Gary.
I,
You're awesome, Gary. You're friggin' amazing,
yep.
Gary. Everything you say is great, Gary. I gotta stick to my guns, right?
Yeah.
I gotta,
Yep.
I gotta,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it's the Shiva
Yep.
lingo, you know. Um,
Yep.
the pole, even the Argonaut ship and the quest for the golden fleece. I mean, are they questing for an
Yep.
actual fleece? Are they questing the light, the warmth from the sun?
Yeah. Well, or something that the sun provides. So the
Yeah,
golden fleece was the golden fleece was the clothing that the gods and the demigods would like to wear because it protected the Oiketerion that their spirit was in, which is part of the physical world that died with the Nephilim. It's the soul and the spirit. I mean, soul and the body. I mean, and so that golden fleece was what wrapped around them and enabled the body to continue without decay. And so that could be understood as threads, or it could be understood as light. And all the angels and gods were shining beings, opalescent shining beings, until they took a physical form, and then they had a different type of shining essence to them, and that would envelop them. So you could interpret that as light or as specific clothing, but whatever it
yeah,
did, it wrapped around them and it had
yeah.
a purpose.
Yeah, even like in Greek and Mary's the other ones too, like they have the golden hair of Phobos. I mean, that's very advanced knowledge of the sun, the golden hair, and you would have to have
Yeah, yeah,
advanced vision of the sun to see that.
yeah. Yes, you would have to have that knowledge
Yeah,
somehow, some way,
yeah,
and to come down into the rituals, that knowledge had to have been passed on. However, it was understood by the humans and giants at that time.
yeah. I mean, yeah, before we go, we have a couple of minutes before we go. We can also talk about some of the festivals of fire to achieve immortality. They have all sorts of festivals of fire. And we have even Christmas time that is basically like a festival, a cult festival, the way that Catholics and even Christians, some of the Christians do the ritual with Christmas and various things like that. So if you want to, maybe we could get even how the the fir tree even is a pyramidal tree that they sometimes use as a fire ritual and things like that. And there's various things that have to do with certain times of the year where they have these fire rituals or sacred fire rituals where they even ingest certain things.
Yeah, it is. I think when you're having to walk through fire in these rituals, ingest fire, it is. I think it's in my speculation is it's suggesting that you have an ability to control those elements that they can't hurt you, and that it is a suggestion that that's sort of part of the immortality that you would have, that you could do that if you got to a certain level. So, and Sol Invictus, as you were mentioning, is um, the second part of the Roman religion that was merged and homogenized into Christianity along with Mithraism, where you have that whole celebration of Sol Invictus, along with the birth of Mithra as part of the source to the religion and a branch of the Zoroastrian religion. And you have basically 8 major Sabbaths in polytheism all around the world. And we see holidays that are used in our modern world that are thought to be Christian, centering around a lot of those uh, Sabbaths. So you have one at each of the solstice and the equinoxes, which is your 4. And then in between, you have halfway through that quarter, you have another one. So, I mean, if you go from, you know, the end of December, after you get through Sol Invictus and the New Year's ones, then you're basically into Valentine's halfway through, and everything that's sort of leading into Valentine's and the some of the more bizarre ones in terms of the rituals that we've covered in the past, that have to do with the goat gods and running through the streets and things like that. And then you have the May Day celebrations that are happening, from the May and Maiden festivals to May Day to uh, everything sort of nature that's in between uh, spring and June. And you've got Samhain, for example, that is following um, the September 21st seasonal change, and that's the most holy day. And so in each of these, in many of these, you have bonfires that are being lit as well. And that's done in a number of purposes. Sometimes it's to ward off the evil spirits, and sometimes it's to create portals to bring them through and show the spirits the way to them. So the types of trees that are used are always important in these types of bonfires, just as, for magic sticks, you would use Hollywood. Just as we talked about
Yeah.
the evergreen tree as a sign of the world tree, which is a sign for immortality. A deciduous or a hardwood tree or broadleaf tree, it represents reincarnation when it loses its leaves and comes back in, and it equates into the seasons as well. And that the evergreen is sort of equivalent to the fir tree in that kind of understanding, and that's more or less more for the structural essence, and those trees were used in buildings for structure, right? And particularly to house the palaces and the temples. So the evergreen tree on Mount Hermon in the cedar forest um, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, that would be one of those trees that would be used. And then, as we said, for the oak trees and the elm trees, and one presumes that there would be other trees that would be used in conjunction with these other rituals. I'm not learned on the details of all of those rituals, but I know there'd be a different tree likely for each of the 8 celebrations.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to find out. Yeah, it's very important about the trees always. Even with the mistletoe that we mentioned, there's a Scandinavian sun god called Baldur,
Yeah,
and yeah, they have to light those midsummer fires so he guide him through the underworld. And I think
yeah,
it's the mistletoe is the only thing that could kill him or something like that
yeah,
in the story. He has to, yeah. And then they light all those bonfires to guide him through the underworld. So it's sort of like an astral guide, these fires, right? As he's guiding him through his mystical journey.
yeah, yeah.
It's incredible, yeah. Well, Gary, it's always been a pleasure to share your knowledge with us all and to have these conversations with you. We definitely have conversations that are very rare and exclusive. And you are listening, everybody, to the Space Water Podcast. And you can find Gary Wayne right here at his amazing website. You're putting it up on the screen now. There's a little bit of a delay, so I don't know if you guys can see it yet, but it's Genesis6conspiracy.com. His name is Gary Wayne. He has 2 books. You guys, here's the books right here. Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 1 and Part 2. Really incredible, guys. You could contact him on social media. Once again, Gary, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your opinions and your well, amazing research, well done research that you've been working on. I really appreciate your knowledge.
I appreciate that, and I'd love getting together to, take information from different research to try and create a larger sort of understanding of prehistory and maybe what's coming,
Yeah.
because as we said, nothing is new under the sun. And I was I probably should have also mentioned on those 8 Sabbaths, look at that as a big wheel every year, because it's
Yes.
also part of that
The,
wheel.
yes.
It's
The
called the
wheel of the
wheel of the
year.
year. Yeah, and it's all part of that whole allegorical understanding. And like that oak tree is used in June 21, for example. Why? I mean, okay, it's important to the Tuatha De Danann, but it's going to have, a larger um, meaning to it. And in the May days from May 1 to 13, they used to do bright fires and try and do um, create this sort of white shining sort of scenario for some sort of purpose. I don't know what all of these are for, but I know there's a constant there of the trees and the wheel and the sun worshiping aspect and the cycle that is absolutely woven into everything that they do. So don't think that their rituals are random. They are for a purpose and they are ancient.
I totally agree with you on that, and I definitely agree on the monotheistic side. With there's a conclusion to it all. It's not just an eternal battle of light and darkness. I do believe that we're culminating to something, for sure, and that there's a divine plan for all of us.
We can only hope. We can only have faith.
Yep, I think yeah, Gary, I can't believe it's all about just insignificant. I do believe there's some sort of heaven and higher spirit for us all. And maybe it's the big struggle of who we are, and that's why we come back is to learn here and to it's a big struggle,
Yep.
you know. It's a big struggle, but
I
thank
think we're here to learn it. We're here to
yep,
learn as much as we can and make our choice the best as we can. And I encourage people to do all of that and know that no decision is still a decision.
that's true. That's true. And tomorrow's always a new day, people. So if you've done things in the past that you're not proud of, it doesn't mean that you got to stay that same person. You could change. And I really appreciate everybody. This is the Space Water Podcast and Mr. Gary Wayne. You can find at Genesis6conspiracy.com. You can find me at the